Okay, we're back with the second half of perpetual traumatic stress disorder discussions. Okay, so two things off the bat. We have external factors versus internal factors. By internal, I don't mean in your brain, I'm referring to departmental stuff. Now, external, that's pretty easy to rationalize. With officers going through stressful situations constantly, it's imperative to rotate these officers out of environments that contribute to perpetual traumatic stress disorder. Now, how do we diagnose when this is occurring? Well, the thing is, a very simple understanding of this is that you have an officer who works in a nice environment for 10, 15 years, whatever else, getting cats out of trees and finding lost library books. Their capacity to experience this is a lot less than somebody who's working in a high crime environment, dealing with constant robbery, shootings, burglaries, etc. So in this case, the dynamic of who experiences what at a specific time is extremely variable, and also you get internal neurochemistry, which is hard to differentiate on a person-to-person basis. But I'll get into that in just a second regarding recognizing the factors. But it is imperative to rotate officers out of environments that contribute to PTSD or perpetual traumatic stress disorder before it occurs. So therefore, if a department would make a policy where you can only stay in a unit for a specific amount of time, or in an area for a specific amount of time, I don't mean a shift, I mean a specific just location that is high stress, just because it is for their own welfare. It is extremely important. Now, internal contributing factors. In my opinion, the internal contributing factors basically are 60% of everything. So this right here is 40%, while the rest of the nonsense that goes internally with the department makes it the majority of it. Now, both of these combined, from what I'm formulating, is the result of 90% of all complaints regarding excessive use of force, discourtesy complaints, insubordination, general low productivity or low capacity to do the job efficiently, is a result of perpetual traumatic stress disorder from the combination of both external and internal factors. Now, for the internal contributing factors, how do we deal with this? Well, one thing that contributes to PTSD right here is recognizing the problem. Nobody does that. Nobody looks at officers and says, well, they might be undergoing some neurochemical imbalance as a result of the job. So it is a three-part process here. One, it's up to officers to recognize our own neurochemistry. We should realize when we're going through these situations and be able to say, I need to be placed somewhere else out of this position. Two, the brass. And you'll see right here, and this is from my research that I've done. I've talked to officers from across the United States, and it seems that the brass, for a lack of a better way to put it, they don't give a shit. And this is extremely disheartening here, because what the result of this is that the brass not caring causes officers to be in the system where they constantly are hyper aggressive to people, or they violate people's civil rights, or they're excessively using force, not doing actual veritable police work. And the victim at the very end is the citizens that were there to basically serve. So the lack of care needs to be resolved, and the brass needs to recognize that this is a problem. This should be imperative to them to recognize this. And the public, last in this step, is that the public needs to take a stance towards this. Instead of just saying that, F the police and everything else like that, how about we analyze why officers are going through these problems, or why they're doing these activities that are either illegal or not sustainable in policing ecology, and find a way to fix it through bringing it to the administration and analyzing things like perpetual traumatic stress disorder. So how you make these people care in regards to administrative stuff is you have to train them on the problem. Once you actually establish that there is a problem and that people are culpable if they do not recognize this and they do not do the training for it, then they have to care, obviously, because otherwise then it's a big legal issue. So train superiors on the problem. Now this goes back to when I was talking about the external factors. Now when you have sergeants and lieutenants and captains and whomever else that directly associate with rank and file, based upon what's going on, which is they should be no commander should just be completely oblivious to what's going on regarding what each individual officer, no matter how large the department is, because you're only in charge of a certain amount of guys. So you have to know them personally or hold their hands or anything else like that, but just have a general consensus of who they are, and their work product and that sort of stuff. So when you train superiors on this problem, they can recognize, oh, Officer Johnson, his attitude's changing slightly. How can we, what's the problem? Is it a result of perpetual traumatic stress disorder, and how can we fix it? Not that this guy's not a worker or he's broken or to hell with him or anything else like that. Because in actuality, if an officer gets to the point where they're facing this, not the officer's problem, it's the command staff's problem, and they're culpable for this. Third, streamlining internal issues. Now, what this is basically minimizing the crap and bureaucracy involved with policing. Now, what's going to happen is the more work you place in an officer, the more stress they're going to get. I don't mean answering more calls or anything else like that. But when you have a system where officers are doing disproportionate amounts of work, invidious comparisons start to take place where stress, I'm handling more than Officer Smith, who's also in my same area and is responsible for half the calls. But the bureaucracy states that we can't regulate that, or they don't attempt to regulate that. Or adding more paperwork, more policies, I have to do more X, Y, and Z. And it starts to compound. And it makes these issues that, like the actual violent crimes and things like that that we're trained to deal with, makes them that much worse. So, number 4, and this is a big one here, which seems that out of all the departments that I have talked to officers from, this is a problem. And this is a federal guideline issues that they do not follow. Superiors must absolutely adhere to policy and legal guidelines, okay? Policy is there for everybody. It's not just for rank and file. It's not just for Joe Smith officer. If we have to follow policy as rank and file, so does the administration, okay? It's as simple as that. If I cannot do something, then the administration and the brass should not as well, okay? It's a two-way street, okay? We are all in the same environment together, and we have to adhere to the policy that is established. Legal guidelines. What do I mean by this? Well, the federal government has done us the favor of, and everybody the favor, not just police officers, of establishing certain things an employer can do and cannot do, okay? Like HIPAA, for example. HIPAA deals with an employer cannot ask you specific medical questions regarding any treatment you might have had or anything else like that. So what I've seen in the interviews that I've done with officers is that you'll have brass that actually, if a guy calls in sick and they'll say, well, I need a doctor's note to describe exactly what is wrong with you, everything else like that. By law, you can't ask that, okay? You can, like NYPD, for example, they'll send you to a doctor. Department doctor, which I'm okay with because you actually have an MD who's analyzing to see if there's an issue. So, but other smaller departments or non-unionized departments, for example, you'll have this crap go on constantly. And again, by law, you just can't do that. You can't say, I need you to give me a valid medical explanation as to why you did this. Now, legally, I can tell you that I'm sick, and if a department has like a sick leave, then you can call in sick. And some departments say that you need a doctor's note after a certain amount of time, which I'm also okay with. The doctor's note just says that so-and-so came to me for the sickness. It doesn't describe what exactly. FMLA, Family Medical Leave Act. This is kind of similar to this right here. FMLA deals with if you have a spouse or family or kids and that sort of stuff that get sick, you are allowed to take a certain amount of time. They can't penalize you for it. And what both of these right here, you'll have departments that will penalize officers that don't have established sick leave. Like they might have a system where all leave is counted under one bracket. So therefore, if you take sick leave, it's counted as an unexcused absence, despite the fact that you were sick. So it's kind of, you're in a catch-22. You're damned one way or another. So with these two right here, like if you have valid FMLA, or if you have valid doctor's note, or you're following, like if we're following HIPAA guidelines as officers and that sort of stuff, they damn you anyway for it. Even if you have it. And to me, that you just can't do that. It's that simple. You can't penalize officers for that specific thing. And this is one, it's an administrative failing for not having sick leave policies. And 2, it's a lack of training or blatant just stupidity on part of commanders that ask these invasive questions because you just can't. Okay? Again, it stops at, I went to a doctor, the doctor signed this is you. No more about that. FLSA, which is a Fair Labor and Standards Act. What this establishes that non-exempt employees who work wages, like police officers, for example, and I think firefighters, I'm not sure about nurses, I don't know how that goes, but any like usually public service employee who gets paid hourly, this sort of stuff, that the department has to pay you, okay, for overtime and holiday pay by law. Okay, so anything work related, anything at all. Okay, so Commander Smith says, I need you to come in and talk to me about X, Y, and Z. Okay, well, you gonna pay me for it? No, you have to come in. Actually, for this, no, I don't. So unless you're gonna put it in writing, which I could, in that case, somebody would give to their union lawyer, they have to pay you for it. Okay? The commanders get by with trying to do, like skirt it, but the whole thing is creating a system like this where you're going to violate FLSA, for example, or say, well, I just need you to come in for a little while, we got to talk about X, Y, and Z. And if an officer says no, then they're automatically the bad guy versus the officer's just trying to follow the guidelines, trying to be fair. Okay? And when these are not followed, these three right here, then it makes external factors that much worse and contributes to perpetual traumatic stress disorder. OSHA, it deals with safety, basically giving you the correct equipment. That's pretty simple. I don't see many violations of this, but some things I've seen which are like glaring problems are for OSHA, like for basic safety stuff, like if you're in a decrepit building that doesn't have adequate ventilation, that sort of stuff. That needs to be addressed, because if you're in an environment with poor air quality, etc., that's a medical issue, and obviously that's going to make stress that much worse. EOC. This is a big one. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. So EOC regulates that there cannot be discrimination based upon gender, creed, age, nationality, and religion. Okay? But I see this happen constantly from the interviews that I've gotten from officers, where officers are discriminated against because of their race, because of their religion or lack thereof, their nationality, their creed, etc. So this right here creates a hostile work environment, which obviously is going to go right back to perpetual traumatic stress disorder. I mean, this is a direct corollary right here when you have a hostile work environment. When you have superior officers that will sexually harass subordinates, and that feeling for that officer from like one I read that was like, wow, I really feel bad for this officer having to go through this problem, because they feel they're alienated from their job. They can no longer do their job because one, this has been perpetuated right to this, and two, it's just completely hostile. Their rights are being violated. That's what it comes down to. And there's nothing they can do about it. So again, superiors absolutely have to adhere to policy and legal guidelines. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. And there should be zero tolerance for violations of this. Finally, focus of the brass must be on officer safety and welfare. I cannot hammer home this point enough. Okay, I'm very passionate about this entire subject, but number 4 and number 5 to me are imperative to stop this. Stop issues where officers are beating the crap out of people, to stop officers that are broken permanently from this job, etc. It all starts with this right here. If the brass has a focus and they have a care for their officers, if they say, I care about Officer John Smith, therefore I'm going to do my best to work around his schedule, for example, or to make policies that are sustainable, and I'm not going to arbitrarily do things to harm them based upon my selfishness, then it creates a system where everybody has faith in everybody else that they're going to do what they need to do for the job. Okay? It creates a sustainable system. All right, so what are some examples of a lack of focus on officer safety and welfare from the brass? One is arbitrary shift changes. You'll have some departments that will just randomly shift their officers around in terms of, well, you're working days for these 3 weeks, we're going to shift it in 3 weeks to nights. No real purpose of doing it, just because it assists the commander in doing what they need to do. Or you'll have a commander that says, I need you to come in and do X, Y, and Z on your off day, going right back to the FLSA stuff, and assist me with X, Y, and Z. Well, aside from the fact that you have to pay them for it, number two is you're now screwing with the officers' time off and their safety and welfare in regards to their sleep and their recuperation, right? In the hopes to stave off the perpetual traumatic stress disorder issues. Another example pertaining to that is like, suppose you're working a long shift, for example. Let's say you've got a 10-hour shift, and then the commander says, well, I need to do something with the next rotation, so you guys have to stay an additional 2 hours at the very end. So now the officer's gone from working 10 hours to 12 hours for no actual real reason. It's not like they need coverage for anything, it's just the commander has to do something. And right off the bat, a problem with that is that, well, the commander's being selfish, making everybody else who's already worked 10 hours in a high-stress environment to now adhere to their schedule as well, okay? And if he does it again the next day, and the next day, for example, so now you're accruing overtime, you're exhausting these officers, okay? And another part about that is what is really sinister is that it's possible that the commander actually doesn't care. They're like, whatever, I'm making these policies and they have to do what they have to do because I said so. Obviously, that violates sustainable policing ecology and makes for a very bad and hostile work environment. Another example, a lack of uniform policies, which goes right back to, would have been number four. So, with the lack of uniform policies, that means that people can do whatever the hell they want when they want, including the brass, and only certain people have to follow these policies, but not others. And so everybody's walking around confused. Nobody knows exactly what policies to follow, and if they don't follow a certain policy because other people aren't following it, they get hammered for it. So there needs to be a uniform system of discipline, like disciplined thought, basically, and disciplined action about how we do these actions and how we're supposed to go about doing our police work. So, I know that the last thing I'm going to talk about is the lack of objective standards. This pertains to like lateral transfers, promotions, and that sort of stuff. Typically, like I've talked about in my other ones, that numbers will determine if you go somewhere in certain departments based upon the interviews that I've done. So there's no objective standards, and this makes it so like, why the hell do I care? You know, why should I do anything then? Okay, it burns the officer out, and it makes a stressful environment. And then when you combine all three of these issues, it gives the impression of an unsustainable system to the officer. So an officer is like, well, they become defeatist because I got no option. I don't know what's going on. So they just go along with it, and they get worse and worse, and they become subalternated from it. And then what happens is they actually start realizing that it's a system opposing their welfare. Now, it's the difference between opposing and just not having a system focusing on welfare is there's three factors: positive, negative, and neutral. Neutral is a department where they're not really recognizing that perpetual stress disorder is a problem because they're ignorant of it. And that, to me, is forgivable. Somebody who's ignorant of something and you can teach them and go with it, no issues with that. The negative system, which is in this case I'm talking about right here, is the sinister aspect. That means that people are arbitrarily, capriciously, and negatively doing things to the detriment of officers because they simply do not care. And when you have a system like that, it is not sustainable at all. The attrition rate is going to go through the roof. The turnover rate is going to go through the roof, and people are going to be completely dissatisfied. And back to the issue of perpetual traumatic stress disorder, when all of this stuff is not followed, okay, you're going to get the continuous problems that we have today in policing with violation of civil rights, excessive force usage, officers who are extremely discourteous, like the video I referred to earlier. And consequently, the entire system becomes something where it is increasingly more destructive. People increasingly lose faith in the police across the United States. And the job just becomes nothing. It becomes a former shadow of what it's supposed to be, okay? There are a lot more issues besides this 1 through 5 right here. This is a very brief, for video and parsimony's sake, way of explaining this to the general populace and the other officers and possible brass. I can go on for hours about both examples that I've read about, my own experiences, and actual issues that can come up. But that sort of stuff would take too much of you guys' time, probably pretty boring. So if you guys have any questions regarding this whatsoever, I'll be glad to answer them in video format or via email. And if any drafts or administrators that agree with this, exactly what I'm saying, or recognize problems within their department and think that maybe we need to reanalyze this, send me an email. I'll be glad to do consulting, or if you want to talk on the phone or anything else like that, I'll be glad to give as much time as I can to fixing this stuff so we can make like a system of ecology for policing that is sustainable, where people have faith return to police, and police are no longer having continuous overt factors regarding perpetual traumatic stress disorder. Thanks for your time.